Security. Get this homeless woman out of my gala. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned to stare. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. The woman never argued. She simply lowered her eyes and quietly whispered, "Father, forgive them." The room erupted with ridicule. No one noticed the tall Korean man who had just entered through the grand doors. No one recognized him. Until the entire ballroom suddenly fell silent. Without saying a single word, the feared businessman walked past politicians, past celebrities, past billionaires, then stopped in front of the woman everyone had rejected, and to the shock of every person in the room, he slowly bowed his head before her. In that moment, the CEO realized he hadn't humiliated a nobody. He had just insulted a woman whose true identity, and whose God-given influence, would change his life forever. A woman hidden by grace. 3 weeks earlier, London glittered beneath the evening lights. Luxury cars rolled through Mayfair. Elegant hotels welcomed royalty, diplomats, and business leaders from across the world. Above them all stood the magnificent Ashford Royal Hotel, where London's elite gathered to celebrate influence, wealth, and power. Inside the city, few people noticed a woman walking quietly through the streets with a worn coat over her shoulders. To passing strangers, she looked invisible. Some assumed she was homeless. Others avoided eye contact. No one imagined that beneath the old coat was a woman whose greatest treasure could never be measured by money. Her name was Hannah Adeyemi. Every morning, before the city awakened, Hannah could be found serving breakfast at a small church shelter. She prayed with the lonely. She comforted the elderly. She encouraged young mothers who had nowhere else to turn. She never asked for recognition. She simply believed that every act of kindness was an offering to God. Only Pastor Michael knew the truth. Months earlier, Hannah had quietly sold nearly everything she owned after her parents passed away. Instead of protecting her inheritance, she had used most of it to rescue struggling families from eviction, pay school fees for orphan children, and support the church's outreach ministry. She chose generosity over comfort, service over applause, faith over appearances. Now, her savings were almost gone. Her clothes had become simple. Her life looked ordinary. Yet her heart had never been richer. One rainy afternoon, as Hannah finished serving hot soup to an elderly woman, Pastor Michael approached with an envelope. "Hannah," he said gently, "someone asked me to give this to you." She opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation embossed with gold lettering. The Ashford Royal Charity Gala, hosted by Richard Sterling, one of London's most celebrated CEOs. Hannah looked up in surprise. "There must be a mistake." Pastor Michael smiled. "I don't believe heaven makes mistakes." She turned the invitation over in her hands. She had no designer dress, no expensive jewelry, no influential friends, only her faith. She had no idea why she had been invited, but deep within her heart, she sensed that God was leading her somewhere she could never have imagined. And across the city, another invitation had just arrived in London. It wasn't addressed to a politician, or a king, or a billionaire. It was addressed to Chairman Kong Min-jae, a powerful Korean businessman whose quiet influence reached boardrooms across Asia and Europe. Very few people knew why he was coming to London. No one knew who he intended to meet. And certainly no one suspected that his journey had everything to do with the humble woman everyone else overlooked. Because heaven often hides greatness inside the people the world refuses to notice. The invitation no one understood. By sunset, the Ashford Royal Hotel looked less like a building, and more like a palace. Its towering crystal chandeliers shimmered through the glass walls. Luxury cars lined the entrance one after another. Television crews stood behind velvet barriers, waiting to capture the arrival of Britain's most influential people. Tonight, only 100 guests had been invited. Royal family representatives, government officials, international investors, billionaires, celebrities, and one guest, whose name had been whispered across continents: the Korean Mafia Boss. No one knew exactly how much of the rumors were true. Some claimed he controlled a business empire stretching across Asia and Europe. Others believed presidents requested private meetings with him. Many simply knew him by one name: Chairman Kong Min-jae. He was a man people respected, but feared even more. And tonight, he had accepted Richard Sterling's personal invitation. Inside the ballroom, Richard adjusted his tuxedo as event coordinators rushed around him. "Everything must be perfect," he said. "I don't want a single mistake." One assistant hurried over. "Sir, we've confirmed the arrival of ambassadors from France and Japan." "Good. And the chairman?" The assistant lowered his voice. "His convoy has crossed Westminster Bridge. He should arrive within 30 minutes. Richard smiled. "Excellent. This partnership will change everything." But before another word could be spoken, another assistant approached with visible concern. "Sir, we have a small problem." Richard frowned. "What is it?" "The guest list." "What about it?" "There's a woman outside. She has an invitation." "But..." The assistant hesitated. "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Richard's expression hardened. "What do you mean?" "Her clothes are old. She arrived on foot. Some guests think she's homeless." Richard let out a quiet laugh. "Then someone has made a very expensive mistake." He straightened his jacket. "I'll deal with it myself." Across the street, Hannah stood quietly beneath the glow of a London street lamp. A cool evening breeze swept through the city. She looked down at the gold invitation in her hands for what felt like the 100th time. "Lord, if this isn't where you want me, I'll turn around. But if you brought me here, give me the courage to walk through those doors." She took a slow breath, then crossed the street. Every step felt heavier than the last. Luxury cars continued arriving. Women in elegant gowns walked across the red carpet. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed as photographers called their names. Then, the crowd noticed Hannah. Their conversations stopped. Some stared. Others whispered. One woman covered her mouth. Did she come to ask for money? Another shook his head. Security should have stopped her outside. Hannah heard every word, but she kept walking. Not because she was fearless, because she had learned long ago that when God tells you to move, you don't stop because people are talking. At the top of the marble staircase, Richard Sterling stepped outside. His eyes immediately found Hannah. He slowly looked her up and down. Her simple shoes, her worn coat, her modest dress. Then he noticed the gold invitation in her hand. His smile disappeared. Something about tonight was no longer going according to plan. And just beyond the hotel gates, a convoy of black luxury SUVs quietly pulled to a stop. Their engines fell silent. The doors remained closed. Inside the lead vehicle, Chairman Kong Min-jae watched everything through the tinted window, including the woman standing alone, being judged by an entire ballroom before she had spoken a single word. His expression changed. For the first time that evening, the feared Korean Mafia boss whispered only 3 words. "It's really her." Outside, no one had any idea that the next few minutes would become the most unforgettable moment in the history of the Ashford Royal Gala. The woman everyone judged. The moment Hannah stepped onto the red carpet, time seemed to slow. The laughter faded. Conversations stopped. More than 200 pairs of eyes followed her every step. She held the golden invitation with both hands. Her heart pounded beneath her simple navy blue dress. Not because she feared the wealthy guests, but because she wanted to represent Christ well. "Father," she prayed silently, "let them see you in me." A group of elegantly dressed women exchanged amused glances. "She can't be serious. Who invited her? She looks like she slept on the streets." A young businessman chuckled. "This is a charity gala. Maybe she thinks we're giving away money." Laughter spread through the crowd. Hannah heard every word. Each sentence pierced like a knife. But she refused to answer. Instead, she remembered the words of Jesus. "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." She quietly whispered, "I trust you, Lord." Inside the ballroom, Richard Sterling watched from the grand staircase. His jaw tightened. Everything he had built, everything he had planned, everything depended on tonight. International media were broadcasting the gala live. Members of the Royal Foundation were present. Foreign investors filled the room. And somewhere nearby, the feared Korean Mafia Boss was expected to arrive. Nothing could be allowed to ruin the evening. Nothing. Richard turned to his head of security. "Find out who that woman is." Immediately, the guard hurried toward Hannah. "Good evening, ma'am. May I see your invitation?" Hannah smiled gently and handed it over. The guard unfolded the thick gold card. His eyes widened. He checked it once. Then again. His expression changed. "This." He looked confused. "This invitation is authentic." Another security officer stepped closer. "Impossible." "Check it again." They scanned the invitation against the guest database. A green confirmation appeared. Valid invitation. Both men stared at each other. If it's genuine, then who invited her? Before either could answer, Richard himself walked toward them. The crowd instinctively stepped aside. His polished shoes echoed across the marble floor. He stopped directly in front of Hannah. His piercing eyes examined her from head to toe. "You have quite the confidence." Hannah answered respectfully. "I was invited." Richard extended his hand. "The invitation." She gave it to him. He studied every detail. It was genuine. Personally signed. Impossible to forge. Yet, nothing about the woman before him matched the image of someone who belonged among London's elite. Richard folded the invitation. His voice became colder. "Tell me, which charity brought you here?" Hannah looked at him calmly. "No charity brought me. I came because I was invited." Murmurs spread throughout the ballroom. Richard's patience began to disappear. "You expect me to believe that someone reserved one of the most exclusive seats in London for you?" Hannah didn't defend herself. She simply nodded. "Yes." Her quiet confidence irritated him even more. Across the room, guests pulled out their phones. Some secretly recorded the confrontation. Others whispered excitedly. The atmosphere had completely changed. This was no longer a charity gala. It had become a public spectacle. Outside, rain began to fall over London. At the hotel entrance, a convoy of matte black armored SUVs rolled to a silent stop. Every security officer straightened instantly. The hotel manager rushed toward the entrance. The ballroom doors slowly opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. No music played. No one spoke. Every head turned. A tall man dressed in an immaculate black suit stepped inside. His face was calm. His presence alone silenced the room. Behind him walked several disciplined bodyguards. No introductions were necessary. Everyone knew who he was. Chairman Kong Min-jae, the Korean Mafia Boss. Richard's face immediately lit up. He smiled and stepped forward with both hands extended. "Chairman Kong, welcome to London." But Kong didn't even look at him. His eyes had already found someone else. Someone standing quietly, still holding her dignity, in the middle of a room filled with judgment. Hannah. For one brief moment, the powerful mafia boss closed his eyes, as though remembering a promise made many years ago. Then, without greeting a single billionaire, without acknowledging a single royal guest, he began walking directly toward the woman everyone believed did not belong. And every heartbeat in the ballroom seemed to stop. The bow that silenced London. The ballroom became eerily quiet. No one moved. No one breathed. Every eye followed Chairman Kong Min-jae as he walked across the polished marble floor. His footsteps echoed through the magnificent hall. Slow, steady, deliberate. Richard Sterling forced a smile and stepped forward again. "Chairman Kong, welcome. It is truly an honor to host." Without breaking his stride, Kong walked past him. Richard's smile froze. The guests exchanged puzzled glances. What is he doing? Where is he going? Is something wrong? The chairman ignored every whisper. His sharp eyes remained fixed on only one person. Hannah. Standing alone. Still clutching her invitation. Still surrounded by people who believed she didn't belong. The bodyguards followed several steps behind him. Not a single one spoke. Not a single one looked away. When Kong finally stopped, he stood directly before Hannah. She looked up in surprise. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Tears slowly gathered in Kang's eyes. The feared Korean Mafia boss. The man governments negotiated with. The man whose name commanded fear across continents. Suddenly lowered his head. Then, to the complete shock of everyone inside the Ashford Royal Hotel, he slowly dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the ballroom. Phones slipped from trembling hands. Champagne glasses nearly fell to the floor. What? No. Did he just? This can't be happening. Then Kong bowed deeply before Hannah. Not as a businessman. Not as a ruler. But as a man expressing profound gratitude. Silence covered the ballroom like a heavy blanket. Richard Sterling could barely speak. His face turned pale. The chairman remained bowed for several moments before quietly saying, "My lady, I have searched for you for 20 years. Hannah's eyes widened. Mr. Kong. You remembered? A gentle smile appeared on his face. How could I ever forget? You gave hope to a boy the world had abandoned. The room fell silent again. Richard stepped forward, unable to hide his confusion. Chairman. You know this woman? Kong slowly stood. His expression changed. The warmth disappeared. His eyes became cold. You call her this woman. I call her the person who saved my life. Nobody dared interrupt. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Kong looked around the ballroom. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable authority. 20 years ago, I was not the man standing before you. I was a frightened teenager. I had no family. No food. No future. I arrived in London with nothing. People crossed the street to avoid me. They mocked my clothes. They treated me as if I were invisible. His eyes returned to Hannah. But one young woman stopped. She gave me food. She prayed for me. And before she left, she placed a small Bible in my hands. Hannah smiled through tears. I remember. You told me your name was Min. Kong nodded. You told me that if I entrusted my life to God, my past would never define my future. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. Slowly, he removed an old, worn Bible. Its edges were faded. Several pages had been carefully repaired. I have carried this Bible every single day for 20 years. A tear rolled down Hannah's cheek. The entire ballroom stood frozen, not because of Kang's power, but because of the quiet kindness of one woman. A kindness no one had noticed. Richard lowered his eyes. His heart pounded with shame. Only minutes earlier, he had measured Hannah by her appearance. Now, he was discovering that heaven had measured her by something far greater. But Chairman Kong wasn't finished. He slowly turned toward Richard Sterling. His face became unreadable. Then he asked one question. A question that pierced the entire room. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, if this is how you treat the woman who showed me the love of Christ, how can I ever trust you with my friendship or my business? No one answered, because everyone knew. The night had just changed forever. The truth hidden behind the coat. The ballroom remained frozen. No one dared to speak. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was convicting. Richard Sterling stood motionless. His perfectly rehearsed gala, his carefully crafted image, his confidence, had all begun to crumble. Chairman Kong slowly turned toward Hannah. His eyes softened. I searched for you in Seoul. I searched for you in New York. I even sent people across Europe. But every trail ended the same way. You had quietly disappeared. Hannah smiled gently. I wasn't hiding. I was simply living the life God called me to live. Kong shook his head in amazement. You saved my life. And never asked for recognition. He looked around the ballroom. Do you know why I came tonight? No one answered. I didn't come to negotiate a business deal. Gasps echoed across the room. Richard felt his stomach tighten. I came to fulfill a promise. 20 years earlier, a frightened teenage boy had sat alone outside a church on a freezing winter evening. Hungry, cold, broken. Most people walked past him. Some avoided looking at him. Others treated him like he didn't exist. Then, one young woman stopped. She removed her own coat and wrapped it around his shoulders. She bought him a hot meal. She prayed with him. Before leaving, she opened her Bible and read from Matthew 25 verse 40. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Kong looked at Hannah. I never forgot those words. They changed my life. His voice became quieter. You told me that if God ever blessed me, I should become a blessing to others. I've spent 20 years trying to keep that promise. The guests listened in complete silence. Many lowered their heads. Some quietly wiped away tears. The woman they had mocked had changed a life simply by showing kindness, not knowing who he would become, not expecting anything in return. Kong reached into his jacket once more. This time, he removed a worn photograph. Its edges had faded with age. He handed it to Richard. Richard looked down. The picture showed a young Hannah standing beside a thin teenage boy outside a small church shelter. Both were smiling. On the back of the photograph were handwritten words. Never stop believing that God can rewrite a person's story. Richard's hands trembled. For the first time in years, the successful CEO realized that he had spent his life judging people by their appearance, while God had been looking at their hearts. He slowly walked toward Hannah. His voice, once filled with pride, now carried humility. Miss Hannah, I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew you. I valued appearance more than character. I was wrong. The entire ballroom watched. Richard Sterling, one of London's most respected CEOs, was publicly humbling himself before the very woman he had humiliated. Hannah looked at him with gentle eyes. There was no anger, no bitterness, only compassion. She smiled softly. Mr. Sterling, I forgave you the moment you looked down on me. Richard stared at her in disbelief. You forgave me? She nodded. Because Christ forgave me first. Those words pierced the room more deeply than any speech ever could. Even Chairman Kong lowered his head in quiet respect. But then, Kong looked toward the stage. His expression became serious. There is one more reason I came. He slowly reached into the inside pocket of his coat. This time, he removed a sealed black envelope marked with his personal crest. I've carried this with me for years. It belongs to Hannah. The entire ballroom leaned forward. What could possibly be inside? No one knew that the contents of that envelope were about to change Hannah's life forever. The promise hidden for 20 years. The ballroom stood in complete silence. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on the black envelope in Chairman Kang's hands. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the musicians had lowered their instruments. Chairman Kong stepped toward Hannah. His hands, usually steady in the middle of billion-dollar negotiations, trembled slightly. This, he said softly, has belonged to you for 20 years. Hannah looked at the envelope, confused. I don't understand. You will. He gently placed it into her hands. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The paper had aged. The royal blue wax seal still bore the Kong family crest. With trembling fingers, Hannah broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. She unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened. It was written in Korean. Chairman Kong smiled gently. "I'll read it." His deep voice echoed throughout the ballroom. To the woman who treated a hungry stranger like family. If you are hearing these words, then God has fulfilled the prayer I prayed many years ago. Many guests looked at one another in silence. Chairman Kong continued. "The night you fed me, you told me never to chase wealth without purpose. You said true success is measured by the lives we lift." His voice began to shake. "I promised God that if he ever changed my life, I would spend the rest of it honoring the woman who showed me his love." A tear rolled down Hannah's cheek. She remembered that freezing winter evening. She remembered sharing her only meal. She remembered praying with a frightened teenage boy who had nowhere to sleep. She had never imagined he would remember. Chairman Kong folded the letter, then reached into the envelope once more. This time, he removed a leather document folder. The ballroom leaned forward. Richard Sterling swallowed hard. What could possibly be inside? Chairman Kong opened the folder. "I founded the Kong Hope Foundation 15 years ago. It now supports orphanages, hospitals, schools, and Christian missions in more than 40 countries." The audience listened in astonishment. "I have searched for Hannah for 2 decades. Because I wanted only one person to lead it." Gasps echoed across the room. Hannah immediately shook her head. "No. There must be someone more qualified." Chairman Kong smiled. "I've interviewed world leaders. I've hired brilliant executives. But I've only met one person who showed kindness before there was any reason to." He stepped closer. "Hannah, I am asking you to become the global director of the Kong Hope Foundation." The room erupted into applause. Some guests stood to their feet. Others wiped tears from their eyes. The woman who had entered the gala looking unnoticed was now being entrusted with a mission that would touch millions of lives. Hannah looked down at the offer, then slowly closed the folder. The applause faded. Chairman Kong looked surprised. "You don't accept?" Hannah smiled gently. "I haven't said no. But before I say yes, I need to ask one question." Chairman Kong nodded. "Anything." She looked into his eyes. "If accepting this position means helping people know Christ, if it means serving the forgotten, if it means giving hope to those the world has abandoned, then I will gladly dedicate the rest of my life to it." A warm smile spread across Kang's face. "That is exactly why I searched for you." He extended his hand. For the second time that night, the ballroom erupted in applause. Richard Sterling stood quietly in the back. He watched as the woman he had tried to remove from the gala became the most honored guest in the room. At that moment, he understood something no business school had ever taught him. Character opens doors. That money never can. But before the evening came to an end, Richard made a decision that no one expected. A decision that would reveal whether his apology had truly come from his heart, or whether it had only been spoken because everyone was watching. A heart truly changed. The applause slowly faded. Yet one man remained frozen. Richard Sterling. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He wasn't thinking about the investors. He wasn't worried about tomorrow's headlines. For the first time in decades, he was examining his own heart. Everything he had built, his fortune, his reputation, his influence, suddenly felt small, because one simple woman had revealed a poverty that no amount of wealth could hide, the poverty of pride. Richard slowly walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last. Guests quietly moved aside, creating a path before him. When he finally stood before Hannah, he did something no one expected. He removed the chairman's medal from his tuxedo. It was the highest honor ever awarded by the Sterling Foundation, an award he had once declared reserved only for extraordinary people. He looked at Hannah, then at the audience. "I've spent my entire career honoring people who built companies, while overlooking those who built lives." His voice cracked. "Tonight, I nearly rejected the greatest guest in this room." He turned toward the hundreds of guests. I judged her clothes. I judged her appearance. I judged her without ever asking for her story. He paused. And I was wrong. The ballroom stood in complete silence. Richard faced Hannah once again. With both hands. He offered her the medal. This honor belongs to you. You showed compassion when no one was watching. You gave without expecting recognition. You lived the very values this gala claims to celebrate. Hannah gently looked at the medal, then back at Richard. A warm smile crossed her face. I appreciate your kindness. But I can't accept it. Richard blinked in surprise. Why? Because every act of love I showed for Jesus. If there's any honor tonight, it belongs to him. The room fell silent once more. Even Chairman Kong lowered his head. Hannah continued. I didn't feed a hungry boy hoping he would become powerful. I fed him because Christ first loved me. I didn't expect this night. I never prayed for recognition. I simply prayed that God would use my life. Several guests quietly wiped away tears. One elderly woman began clapping. Then another. Soon, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Not for wealth. Not for influence. But for genuine faith. Chairman Kong smiled. This, he said softly, is what true greatness looks like. He turned to the crowd. My organizations employ over 100,000 people. I've negotiated with presidents. I've met kings. But tonight, I stand beside the richest woman I've ever known. Many guests looked confused. Hannah certainly wasn't wealthy. At least, not by the world's standards. Kong smiled. She is rich in compassion. Rich in humility. Rich in faith. And heaven measures wealth differently than we do. Richard lowered his head. Hannah, if you'll allow me, I want to do more than apologize. I want to change. I've spent years building an empire. But I've neglected the people standing right in front of me. He took a deep breath. Beginning tonight, the Sterling Foundation will establish a permanent partnership with the Kong Hope Foundation. We will build homeless shelters, fund Christian rehabilitation centers, provide scholarships for orphan children, and support churches serving forgotten communities across Britain. Gasps filled the room. This wasn't a publicity announcement. No reporters had asked for it. No investors had demanded it. It came from a heart that had finally been humbled. Chairman Kong extended his hand. Richard accepted it. The two men shook hands. Not because of business, but because of a shared purpose. As flashes from dozens of cameras filled the ballroom, Hannah quietly looked toward heaven. Her lips moved silently. Thank you, Father. Only you could turn humiliation into a testimony. But as the evening drew to a close, Pastor Michael quietly walked onto the stage carrying Hannah's old, worn coat. He smiled gently. You almost left this behind. Hannah took the coat into her hands. She held it close for a moment. Then she looked across the magnificent ballroom. The chandeliers, the luxury, the applause. None of it had changed who she was. She folded the coat over her arm and smiled. Because she knew. The greatest miracle that night wasn't that the world had finally recognized her. It was that God had never stopped seeing her. The legacy of one act of kindness. 3 months later, London was changing. Not because a new skyscraper had been built. Not because another billionaire had appeared. But because one quiet act of kindness had become a movement. Across the city, newspapers carried the same headline. Sterling Foundation and Kong Hope Foundation launch historic partnership to serve the forgotten. But the newspapers told only part of the story. The real story could be found in places cameras rarely visited. A homeless father receiving the keys to a new apartment. An orphan opening a Bible given to him for the very first time. A struggling widow starting a small business through the foundation's support. A young girl smiling as she walked into school wearing a new uniform. Lives were being restored. Inside the headquarters of the Kong Hope Foundation, Hannah stood before a wall covered with photographs. Not photographs of celebrities or politicians, but ordinary people. Each picture represented a life transformed by compassion. Chairman Kong walked into the room. He smiled. The board approved another expansion. Hannah looked up. Another one? He nodded. We're opening new centers across Europe. More shelters. More schools. More churches. And more opportunities to tell people about the love of Christ. Hannah smiled. Then God deserves all the glory. Across London, Richard Sterling sat alone in his office. The office looked exactly the same. The expensive furniture remained. The breathtaking skyline hadn't changed. But the man sitting behind the desk had. He picked up a framed photograph from the gala. It showed Hannah, Chairman Kong, Pastor Michael, and himself standing together. He smiled quietly, then opened his Bible. It had become part of his daily routine. The same man who once judged people by their appearance now began every morning by asking God for wisdom. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His assistant entered. "Sir, there's a woman downstairs asking for help." Months ago, Richard would have instructed security to handle it. Today, he stood immediately. "I'll go myself." As he walked toward the elevator, he remembered the night that had changed his life forever. Not because he had met one of the world's most feared men, but because God had confronted his pride through one humble woman. That evening, the four of them met once more. Hannah, Chairman Kong, Pastor Michael, Richard Sterling. They gathered quietly inside the small church where Hannah had first met a frightened Korean teenager 20 years earlier. Nothing about the building was luxurious. The wooden pews were worn. The walls carried the marks of time. Yet to Kong, it was the most beautiful place in London. He walked to the front of the sanctuary, then carefully placed the old Bible Hannah had once given him on the altar. "I think," he said with a smile, "it's finally home." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. Pastor Michael opened the scriptures and read softly. "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so some people have entertained angels without knowing it." Hebrews 13 verse 2. The sanctuary became still. No applause. No cameras. No reporters. Just gratitude. After a few moments, Hannah looked around the room and said, "People often ask me how I changed Chairman Kang's life." She smiled gently. "The truth is, I didn't. Jesus did. I simply chose not to walk past someone the world had forgotten." Chairman Kong nodded. "And that one decision changed my eternity." Years later, people would remember the Ashford Royal Gala as the night a powerful Korean Mafia boss bowed before an ordinary woman. But heaven remembered it differently. It was the night pride bowed before humility. Appearance bowed before character. Power bowed before compassion. And the love of Christ was displayed more clearly than wealth, influence, or status ever could. Because the greatest titles in life are not CEO, not chairman, not king. The greatest title anyone can carry is a faithful servant of God. And sometimes, the person the world overlooks today becomes the very person God uses to transform countless lives tomorrow.